it, we've got Tom here and Stuart, going to be talking about Svelte and React. And Stuart, take a minute just to kind of, a little bit of your background. And Tom's like the godfather around here, everybody knows Tom, probably. But just, love to catch you a little bit, then let's jump right into it.
Cool. So hi everybody. Y'all know Tom. It goes without introduction. I am a software engineer that came in to work for Tabula Rasa Healthcare about 3 years ago. Tom was my mentor of sorts. He forced me into a different kind of thinking, which had led me to where I am today. I've been working with the company now for 3 years at Tabula Rasa. Hope to have many more under my belt. It's a very challenging environment and I quite enjoy it. I've been living in Charleston for a long time now. I think about 18 or 19 years of my life. I just turned 31, so that's kind of a revelation for me. I'm really not in my 20s now. So I've started taking my coding a bit more seriously in terms of things that I'd like to do, so this is why I wanted to come out. Long walks on the beach, anything like that. Honestly, I spend a lot of time at my house on Johns Island and then a lot of time working, so that's pretty much me.
And where are you originally from?
I was born in California, but my dad was military, so we moved all over the place.
You ended up here, after you left home and...
So I lived in Italy before moving here again. We had bought a house when I was a kid, and I lived here for about 5 years, so then we moved back after about a dozen years. And ever since, went to high school, went to college, and then said, this is kind of nice. I just recently got married though, and my wife doesn't want to be here anymore. I think she'd like to be in the mountains, so we're trying to find a nice, middle ground in terms of when to jump off and do that.
So, Tom, just format-wise, we're going to hear, can you just tell me how you like?
Yeah. So, what we're going to do today is Grant is going to talk about React and especially show off some of the new features of React. React is a front-end framework that allows you to use components to build a front-end application. It really is like the top of JavaScript communities these days. I think the last stats came out, 60% of all JavaScript developers use React. And like another 20% want to use React. So it is like it's climbed the mountain of a very large ecosystem. So he's going to show off React, and then I'm going to come in and talk about an up-and-comer, something kind of new called Svelte, and let you guys do kind of a comparison, and then we'll take questions afterwards. And I think it'll be a lot of fun.
All right, take it away.
Okay. I don't know if you guys can see it or if you guys saw it earlier. I was playing a typing game. And this was a test for me to see if I could understand hooks, which is a new API that's been introduced to React. So it helps with state management and that kind of thing. But this entire application, just as many other much more complicated applications, has been built entirely with React using components to allow me to have a whole lot of fun playing a typing game where the same words come up over and over. So let's go ahead and move on from this. I just wanted to show you guys a little something, and we can dip into it a bit if we want to, but I really want to talk about how awesome React is and give Tom a run for his money. So, why React? The great, not so great, and the ugly. I actually wanted to name that to the good, the bad, and the ugly, but here we are. Obviously, my name is Stuart Grant. I live out in Johns Island, engineer at Tabula Rasa. And if you want to see my GitHub, there's not a whole lot of interesting things going on, but you are more than welcome to jump on and get these slides. Okay, slide overview. I think I already did the demo. Essentially, it was just a typing game built with React, and we can dip into that code if you guys are interested. But I really want to get into the guts of why React is awesome, why it's maybe not so awesome, and then some of the things that have come up over the past 6 years since its inception. And then why I still choose React after all of that is said and done. Okay, so what exactly is it? And Tom started with an overview talking about how it's a framework. I would actually beg to differ. I think it's a library. I think it's only a library. Oftentimes what you'll see with a framework is a general architecture and idea of how you would structure that particular app that you're using. So if you're using something like Angular, it comes with an MVC that you can use fully, and it tells you exactly how you need to organize things, and you just go with it. React is a little bit different. It is only the V in MVC. Do you guys know what MVC means? Model View Controller. So essentially the view is something that I as a user can interact with. And if I click on something, the controller then tells the model, which interacts with the database, to do what it does. So React is only concerned with the UI and the UX. That's it. Now the library gives you a bunch of goodies, little things to connect the M and the C together, but for the most part, React is only focused on the visual. It's declarative, it's component-based, so when Tom was talking about all of the components that you can put into a React application, it's partitioned in such a way that components can be small and extraordinarily effective, and highly functional. Functional programming is an older paradigm, but it's getting a resurgence recently within the JavaScript community, and thank goodness for that. It's focused on purity of functions, so essentially what I give the function is what, whenever I give something to a function, I expect the same result every time. It's non-mutative, and it's focused on that purity aspect, which leads to better testability, stability, and these are all pylons underneath React. React was built with functionality in mind. It's also mobile ready. I don't know if we have any mobile developers here, but if you are a mobile developer, just know that you can pick up React Native fairly easily if you know React. And one of the coolest things about React Native is if you know something like Objective-C, Swift, Java, you can actually build chunks of that code and inject it into your React Native application, which I find pretty awesome. Like, think about the team efforts that you can have with people who are old school Android developers and maybe some guys who know React. Also, it's supported by Facebook. And I don't have a Facebook account, but I'm sure a lot of people like Facebook. And I honestly find that their development team is outstanding. The amount of communication that they have with the community is second to none. I think that Dan Abramov is a leader, by the way. He's one of the lead developers for React. He lets you know the good, the bad, and the ugly about React at any given point in time. Matter of fact, a lot of my research involved Dan's input. Now just recently, React, and I say recently, September 26, 2017, React 16 came out, and ever since, a whole bunch of really cool things have come out, the context API, hooks. But there's a bigger thing at play here. They changed from the BSD patent license, which effectively protected Facebook from maybe some awkward legal situations, but more so, it choked the open source community. It said to the open source community, you know, if you're going to get bought out by a company, you may need to pay some royalties to Facebook. Nobody liked that. Matter of fact, WordPress was at the front of that battle to say, drop the patent, go with MIT, be truly open source, and that's what they did. So, let's move along. Here's some of the good, and I wanted to start less with the code and more with the value that I get. The time that I spend with React, and every time that I spend time with React, I feel that I'm getting a super big return. Just really, really big, because first of all, like Tom said, 60% of developers use React, and then another 20% are itching to use it. There's a reason why. This stuff is super rewarding, and it allows you to build really complex applications that are actually framed out to where people can understand them. Most popular modern JS library is touched by over 2 million repositories on GitHub. Matter of fact, their number, I think, is now 2.097, so it's about to tick over yet another 100,000 since they announced this, like 2 months ago. It's not slowing down. Actually, it's getting faster. Facebook made it really easy to pull in. I think that this was probably one of the things that led to its adoption. Create React App is a CLI where you can download the CLI, command line interface, and you can type create React App, new, and then you put the name, and it just builds. All the configuration for your React App is set up. You can just host it locally and then see your React app just right in front of you. The amount of time spending configuring and getting ready is nil when it comes to create React app. And people have actually built, like, I wouldn't call them flagship apps. I think at a certain point you should probably take care of your own configuration. But you can go really far with create React app before you have to do any kind of injection. I mentioned Dan Abramov. The community support and leadership is insane. Like, it really is. The fact that the community is so large and you're still able to hear these voices fairly clearly, especially from these three guys. These three guys have led me, as well as Tom, by the way, have led me in the direction of understanding React fully. So Dan Abramov, one of the lead developers on React, is very outspoken when it comes to React. Matter of fact, I highly recommend his blog. It's called Overreacted, I think.
Overreactive, yeah.
Maybe. Either way, he has this awesome blog, and he just recently talked about like React as a runtime, and it's this long explanation of what happens behind the scenes. And for a lot of people, React is magic, and it really isn't. Just look at the code, and the way that Dan talks about the code from a very layman's point of view allows you to pull in that information and retain it. Stephen Greider on Udemy does a bunch of tutorials, another leader in this community, and maintains his tutorials so they're up to date. And then Kent C. Todd's, I think he worked at Airbnb, and then he just recently quit and is now full-time teaching. He built a testing library because, you know, with Jasmine and Enzyme and Jest and Puppeteer and all these different things that you have, he thought it was too complicated, so he just built a testing library that I think is really, really good. So you've got all this support. You also have an expanding open source toolkit, and what I mean by that is you have a ton of functionality that people have already built that they reuse all the time, and then people, of course, go back and forth in the open source community. You got things like Redux for state management, MobX for state management. You have things like React Forms, which I will say one of the weaknesses of React is how it deals with forms, but with React Forms, it's not that difficult. This one might have some contention in here, because I don't know how many of you are JavaScript developers or even JavaScript fans, but I think that it makes you a better developer overall. Like, you're using functional JS, which is just functional programming in JavaScript. You're encouraging testability, you're encouraging modularity with your code and your components. Gives them a purpose, it makes them reusable, it makes them very understandable, and because they're so small, it's difficult to overdo it. Now, all this being said, while it's very easy to learn, I think that it's easy to jump in and be like, oh, hello world, I got this, I understand this. It's extremely difficult to master. I'm still in the process of completely understanding it, but I think that this is a positive. I love this. There's an old game that I played, a board game. Have you guys ever heard of Othello before? Okay. On the box, it was a Milton Bradley game, and the quote was, simple to learn, or easy to learn, lifetime to master, something like that. I found tremendous value from that. The fact that you can keep digging and digging and digging and finding more and building a better application every time, it just brings me tremendous joy. I love it. Now, what's really good about React in regards to what it does, and remember, React is a UI library. It's focused primarily on DOM manipulation. Does everybody know what the DOM is? So when you're looking at a web page and you see all the goodness there, that is a representation, a visual representation of the document object model. Okay? It determines the structure, the architecture of the web page, how it looks, what words are on it, that kind of thing. And it allows JavaScript to actually manipulate it directly using something called the HTML DOM. Now that API that's exposed allows you to do things like get element by ID or change a class or doing any of this stuff. And I'm sure most of you have heard of jQuery. jQuery relied pretty heavily on its interaction with the HTML DOM in order to try and streamline and make better applications and web pages. There's a problem with that though. It is massive. Like when you're looking at a simple website, even you know what? I wonder. Even if you're looking, like look at this. This is a representation of the DOM. Like all of this stuff right here is something that you can use to represent the information that you're pulling in. And you can interact with all of this. And even this, even just this, it's a ton of information to deal with at a time. It's legible, but it's huge. How do you manage that? And how do you make that management of it efficient? Well, you can use something called the virtual DOM, and this is not something that React invented, but it's something that I think React adapted to and is leveraging really, really well. Effectively, it's just an abstraction of the DOM, so think about the way that a document object model, or essentially an object model would look, with properties and values, associations. All this is a virtual DOM, or a DOM that's within the control of React. So at any point in time, you want to update something. Let's say that a user clicks on a button, and I click on this button, and there's an event tied to it where I'm going to change the background color of my page from white to black. So it's a dark mode button. At that point in time, what all do you need to update? Do you need to update everything that's on the web page? Probably not. Actually, I know you don't. You probably just need to update the background styling and maybe have a transition so it looks really cool or something like that. What this does, it allows React to stop the DOM from updating just before, and it takes a snapshot of what it was and what it's going to be. And it makes a comparison. It's called diffing. And when it does that comparison to see what things on the page are actually updating, it allows for efficiency to say, you know what, we only need to update this one thing. We don't need to update this whole page. Let's just slide in our change and call it a day. As a matter of fact, it's super powerful. This is what virtual DOMs are mostly created for, but I think React handles it really, really well. Does that make sense? I feel like I should start asking those kind of questions too. Some more good. This one might be contentious as well, because I think for people who have seen HTML and hate HTML, or maybe have worked with XML and hate XML, this might not be the most friendly thing in the world, but I honestly love it. Who here has used Angular? Who here knows, well, let's not even talk about Angular. Vanilla.js. Anybody? Okay. Essentially, you oftentimes will have an HTML template, some kind of a template, and you'll have some styling to go with it, some CSS, and then you'll have a JS page that affects that, and you have to import that, and you have to do all these kinds of things to connect these three pages together. And they're in three different languages. You've got HTML and CSS as your markup, and then you've got JS as the actual engine that's driving it, user interactions, that kind of thing. That kind of separation can be fairly overwhelming, especially if you're going back and forth all the time. And one of the benefits of using React, one of the best things about using React, is all of your code, including your markup, live in one file. Which means that if I wanted to do something like hello world and have a greeting, so here's my string hello world, and declaring that, this element right here looks like some HTML. And what this actually is called JSX. It's a syntactic sugar for XML, so it looks XML-ish. And all it is it allows you to programmatically develop your front-end elements. So this is an element, and if I do react DOM.render, I pull in that element and then I attach it to the root, all of a sudden this would appear and say hello world. I feel like I should go back to the top. Essentially what you're doing is you're blending all the rendering logic with the UI logic. So all that stuff is blended together, and it gives you the power of JavaScript for your UI logic. You don't have that if you're just using a regular HTML file, or if you're not using a framework or something like that. Now, once again, I can't harken on this enough. Reusability, testability, predictability, all the things that are pylons of functional programming are pylons of React, and that saves you time, and it makes it fun to work with. So, a couple more examples here. Here's a function. This is just a function. Function greeting. I capitalized it here. I'm sending in a prop of message. So I destructured this. This is some ES6 syntactic goodies. So I just have message, and I'm returning my JSX element here, this message, and I'm passing it in. And what the cool thing about this is that you can actually send props directly into your functions, your functional components, with attributes, or what look like HTML attributes. But really what this is all JSX. This is all React interpreting this and essentially compiling it in such a way that's used by your browser. So when you're building components, this is what you're building. You're building JSX, and then you're using it and driving the way that it looks and the interactions with JavaScript right next to your markup. I use markup because it's not really markup. It's still programmatic and it's still JavaScript. This is another example. This, once again, just looks like a regular HTML element, but notice there's a slight difference here. Whenever you're dealing with properties that would be normally available on an HTML element, the difference for this is you're going to start using camel case. So for something like tab-index, so if you have a tab-index of 1, that means when you hit tab on a web page, the first thing you're going to come to, well actually it's tab index 0, I think. Or is it 1? I don't remember. The first index, if you hit tab, you'll go there. You would write it tab capital I index, okay? So you have to use camel case in order to translate that appropriately. But as far as HTML is concerned, you can build anything you want. Like you can build images, you can build lists, you can do UI, UL, LI, so you can do all that stuff, you can do buttons, you can do all of this, but it's powered by JavaScript. Here's a little bit more good. We were talking about functional components. We're talking about having your logic built within your component and being able to manage state. So let's say, do you guys know what I mean by state? Essentially a snapshot of data in a particular moment of time. So state management, before this, I worked with Angular 1, AngularJS, and I actually still work with Angular 1, and it's kind of a nightmare every day that I work with it, but that's okay. We're making strides towards React. AngularJS uses something called two-way data binding, which is a very taxing, performance-wise, it's a fairly taxing exercise to make sure that as things update, those updates will be immediately visible on the DOM, and it goes back and forth. With this, it's a little bit different. Essentially, you have a main component, which lives at the top. You can think of it as a parent component, and it's a very stateful component. That manages all of your stateful logic. It manages whenever something changes, if you're going to press a button, if you're going to type something in, maybe an on-blur event. All of your state management lives at the top, and then you begin to import these children, stateless elements, essentially dumb. That's the word they like to use. You have a smart component, and then you have all these dumb ones. And that smart component acts as a wrapper or a container for all that stateful logic, and then hands it to its children. It's unidirectional, though. So let's go ahead and say that I have an element called foo, and foo is just going to display a name. That flow of putting the name, passing that prop, and I'll even go back to my previous slide and use this as an example. We'll use message as an example. Function greeting here is being passed a prop from the React DOM.render function. So anytime you're passing a prop in, think of this as a kind of a dumb function. This is predictable. This isn't going to change. Based on what I give it, it's always going to display a message wrapped in an H1 tag at all times. It doesn't worry about state or what people do to interact with it. This is testable and it's small, and it allows you to maintain your state in a much easier way. You have a separation of concerns. You have elements that are stateless, components that are very stateful, and like I've been saying over and over, it's an extraordinarily functional kind of relationship. Some more about the good. We just got this awesome API in 16.3. It's called the Context API. Now, if you guys are, who here is actually familiar with React, by the way? I'm curious about that. So one of the tools that React users love to hate is Redux. And what Redux does is it allows you to avoid something called prop drilling. You notice how I passed a message prop into that child? Well, what if you had a child component that lives within that, and then lives within that, and then all of a sudden you're having to drill these properties down. And if you're managing state at the top level, you have to drill your event handlers through too. So if you have a button and you have a click on button event, you want your button to be dumb and just do what the parent tells it to, but you have to tell it explicitly all the way down the chain. Well, you don't really have to with Redux. Problem is nobody wanted to learn Redux, and yet here we are. We had to learn Redux because state management gets out of control otherwise. But with the Context API, React said, let's just bring this into our library. Let's actually give a damn and bring this in and give you something to provide to all of your children state. And this can be top-level state, this can be a theme, this can be authentication, this can be anything that needs to be globally aware to your application. But it doesn't have to be just that anymore because of hooks. I think that these two paired together is the reason why I still use React today. I have considered Vue, I've considered a bunch of other things just to tinker around, but as soon as hooks came out, it was towards the beginning of this year, and they've been playing with it for all of 2018. Hooks are my favorite thing about React. So cool. You essentially have these API methods that are given to you that allow you to just directly affect state, and with context, you can affect that state without having to use class components. Have you guys ever dealt with classes in JavaScript? If you have, I feel really, really bad for you. Classes in JavaScript are so weird. If you're used to classes in any other language, they are not synonymous at all. And I think React knew that, and they knew it was difficult to understand classes and this and how inheritance works within JavaScript because it's not the same. So they said, screw it. We're going to start over. We want to base our entire framework, or library, excuse me, on this idea of functional components. So that's what they did. They said, okay, we're going to give you an API, so you no longer have to use classes to construct your state and then have all of your binds and stuff. You don't have to do that anymore. Now you can just declare it. And I'll even show you guys this in my demo app in a little bit. Actually, we'll do that when we have questions because I think I need to stay on top of time. So no more classes, create reusable stateful logic. One of the cool things about hooks is you can even pull this stuff out. And if you pair it with context, you have things like the use reducer. You have the use reducer API that's given to you. It's a hook that allows you to create a Redux-like state management system without Redux. It's all built into React. Also, third-party support. I can't say it enough. Honestly, I like Redux. I know a lot of people don't like Redux. I'm totally cool with Redux. I haven't looked at MobX, but once you understand the principles behind it, that application of it within React using hooks and context is so much easier. All right, some of the bad, and I put the bad all on one page because I want to bullet through it because it makes me sad, but it's true. It's built by Facebook, and it's still maintained primarily by Facebook, and basically it's for Facebook. Thing is a lot of applications are quite like Facebook. They're not fast moving, they don't have to update that much, they need to be modular and testable. So there's a lot of benefits for designing something similar to a Facebook website, which is why people use it. But it doesn't fit all models. Think about the Facebook experience as a whole. Scrolling through, get to the bottom, I have to update. Okay, there's one event that I have to do at the bottom. It's going to update, boom, there it is. Boom. It's a fairly slow application if you actually think about it. How often are you interacting with something? You click on a picture, it opens in modal. Maybe you type some stuff in. It's not lightning speed. It allows the user to interact comfortably. But what if you need to update your DOM a lot? Think about a stock ticker. Think about anything involving stocks, actually. If you build a UI with React for stock tickers and just blow them up onto the screen and say, here's all your stocks, man, have fun, React isn't going to handle that very well. There's a lot of other frameworks that would handle that a lot better. Matter of fact, I would even argue vanilla JavaScript would handle that better than React. It's also JavaScript. Now, I saw some hands with JavaScript. I don't know what other languages, but it's JavaScript, and there's a stigma. A lot of people still don't like JavaScript. I don't get it. I don't understand. ES6 is an awesome iteration of JavaScript that pulls in a lot of the things that people have been asking for from other languages. So there have been improvements, but that stigma will exist probably for the entire lifetime of JavaScript. Once again, it's only the V. You are entirely reliant upon yourself to architect the M and the C. You are responsible for binding that all together. Some people don't like that. Some people just want to say, give me a framework, dude. Just give me all of that stuff so I can just start building my app, and then maybe I connect a database and that's it. There's a ton of tooling out there to do it, but it's all personal preference, and I prefer the freedom of choice in that regard. I know not everybody does, but that's my opinion. Last but not least, it's your job to organize your application. There are some community standards, there are some things that people have talked about and say, yeah, you should put your components in the components, and maybe you have some views that act as pages, or maybe you have You know, some dumb elements, and maybe you just call them dumb and smart, and you have a folder for both of those things. But what happens if you get into Redux, and all of a sudden now you have actions, actual actions that are tied to reducers, and those reducers are tied to your front end, and all of a sudden now your application is something that you control entirely, for better or for worse, which means you have to have the discipline to make sure that your app is constantly following the guidelines that you set, not the ones that someone's going to come in and swoop and do. So it's a little loosey-goosey in that regard, but think about JavaScript as a whole. JavaScript as a whole is a fairly dynamic language. Actually, it's extremely dynamic. This is why things like TypeScript exist, to help bridge that dynamic gap for a lot of people. Okay, now here are the real ugly things that I don't like. I just said I don't have a Facebook. I don't have a Facebook for a reason. I want to spend my time online coding. I don't really want to dink around all that much, and if I want to see a friend, I give him a call, and then we go get beer. Technology changes all the time, too. So it is super fast-paced. It's super fast-paced. There's constantly new stuff coming out, and I like that. But there's ugly side effects. What if I look up go to YouTube. After this, trust me, go to YouTube. Please look up React tutorial. Like, just look it up and see how many things that you're going to see from years and years ago, 5 years ago. The new hotness, React, check this out, tutorial. And I'm sure people still rely upon that, even though it has no bearing on React as it exists today. Same thing with some of the stuff a year ago. Some of the stuff that's still using classful or class-based components. Why would you do that now that you have hooks? Avoid classes entirely and just use hooks. Well, you don't know that if you go to that one video a year and a half ago. So there's tons of outdated information. Because stuff is coming out so quick, the documentation's quick. I've seen this argument a lot. I don't particularly agree with it, and I think it's because I pair my documentation with conversations by Dan Abramov. I think the only thing I'll do, I don't even have a Twitter account anymore. Just recently deleted that, but what I'll do is I'll go to his Twitter feed and I'll read what he posts, because a lot of it is relevant to what's coming out, and it's in layman's terms. Some documentation is very dry, so pair it with somebody who knows what they're talking about. And obviously this is cyclical. I mean, it just snowballs. I think all of us know what tech debt is. Well, there's a ton of tech debt that lives in React. Because of the size of the community, there's lots of noise. Everybody wants to be right about React, and because of how popular it is, a lot of people think it's a great jumping off point for their, like I was talking about, their YouTube career. And sometimes it is. You know, you get guys like Kent C. Todds, who's now full-time teaching this stuff, which is awesome. Same with Stephen Grider. But sometimes you get really bad information. This last one, I'm not going to go into it because it saddens me even more, because I didn't realize this until about 3 months ago, that React is not reactive at all. And it truly isn't, because JavaScript isn't reactive. What I mean by reactive programming is when I am looking at this cascade of information, I start with foo equals to 1, bar equals to 5, and I multiply those. Multiply is going to equal 5 after that, okay? But if I set foo to 5, it's still going to be equal to 5 in JavaScript. If it was reactive, anytime that I update an element within my component, what would happen is this would then look at the multiply function and say, oh, okay, well, actually this is 25. Think about a spreadsheet, like an Excel spreadsheet. An Excel spreadsheet is 100% reactive. React is 100% not reactive. Okay? Does that make sense? It can be, though. I think with RxJS, you can make it reactive. I don't know if you guys have noticed my enthusiasm for React. I really like React. I think it's great. This is why I choose it. It's challenging. It's hard. It's not easy. Especially coming into it the first time and what? I don't have an HTML file? Where's my CSS? It's in your JS file. You just have access to it. And you can do things like CSS and JS, which is really cool. Like at first, I care a lot about the aesthetic of a website. It's something that I take tremendous pride in. And to see the HTML and the CSS become this programmatic language, more so than it is, because it is a programmatic language, it's just different. I think a lot of people struggle with that. If you're able to adapt to it within JavaScript, it's like this paradigm shift for you. And that's like the only way you want to do it. I even remember the first time I sat with Tom, and Tom's like, yeah, and you can put you put some styling in there, but it's JavaScript, and you put your text in there, and it's just JavaScript. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This makes no sense to me, and I don't like it. And then I bit the bullet, and here I am. I'm always finding new ways to improve my code. Like there's so many people who are a lot smarter than I am telling me, hey, you should try this instead. And taking the time to try it and do it, like with hooks. Like hooks hooked me. I hate to say it. It's such a corny thing to say, but it's true. Like with hooks and with the push to learn that, I built my typing game, and then after that, it was done. It's a functional powerhouse. I love functional JS. It's elegant. It's really, really, really elegant because you've got these small components that can just be reused everywhere. And it's in demand. 60%, 20% want to use it. So that's 80% of developers. 20% who just don't care, but are probably affected by React whether they know it or not. So think about the demand that you could have as a software engineer using React. And lastly, these are some little tidbits. Gatsby, I do some website building on the side for my brother every once in a while. So Gatsby is a great way to create static websites using React. And it pulls in SEO components and a few other things to make it really robust. And you have things like Contentful and WordPress that can integrate, so you can just manage your content and then chug it out with Gatsby. Matter of fact, you can even do that with Markdown if you wanted to. Although Tom just told me about something really cool with Markdown that I want to look into. I'm using Next.js for a bigger project on the side. Next.js is a server-side rendering tool that allows you to use React on the server side. It's a lot more performant. If you've got heavier calculations or you've got things that rely on big data sets, server-side rendering is great for that, and Next is good too. Typically it's a SPA, a single page application, but this allows you to do it page by page. And then the last thing I'm going to touch on, because I know that we probably have some haters in here of JavaScript, maybe. I expected maybe a little bit more people who are going to be like, JavaScript. But TypeScript allows you to bridge the gap between something that's more strongly typed and JavaScript's much more dynamic workflow. So if you have an affinity towards, if I say it's a string, okay? Then TypeScript is for you. Matter of fact, coming from Java or .NET, the connection there is bridged. Okay, so that's it. I don't know if you guys want to see the typing app after, but I'll go ahead and let Tom go because I know I'm about 2 minutes over.
All right, thanks, Stuart.
Sure.
Appreciate it. All right. So I'm going to dive right in, and I may go a little fast because I'm going to do some coding. I'm going to talk about Svelte, and one of the main things that Svelte has, it has a lot of stuff that React has. It's new, and it really tries to focus on satisfying both the developer experience and the user experience. And it's reactive out of the box. And the way that it does it, just like Stuart said, is the JS is not reactive. So the way that Svelte does it is it creates a compiler that compiles your app before the user even touches it and turns it into vanilla JavaScript when the user uses it. So I'm not going to go through the history of the front end, but we have been through quite a churn of a lot of interesting things. And Svelte is just another innovation on that lineage, right? React came out in 2013, and it really changed the front-end community for the better. And Svelte is just building on top of that with ideas. There's a lot of people online. Mobile's a big deal, so the size of your code that you ship down matters, especially for people that have crappy connections, right? So if you want your app or site to be fast, you better care about package size. So, it just makes everything more complicated. We have this fight between user experience and developer experience. Users want speed, developers want sanity, right? They want to feel productive. We battle that all the day. And React really, I think, hits the pinnacle of developer experience. And then when you ship it down to the user, things like Gatsby optimizes the user experience, things like Next, but it can get kind of complicated. So we have build tools, frameworks, libraries. The build tools are the things that really feel very complicated, a lot more magic than frameworks today. This is what I think about when I think about shipping a React app. Right?
That's my blog.
There's Babel, TypeScript, Emotion, Webpack, and yeah, I got a blog now. Awesome. But what if there was a different approach? What if there was a way to achieve UX and DX with a framework? And that's Svelte. And instead of going through more slides, what I want to do is just code and give you a feel, because that's how I get introduced to new things. I got to kind of see it in action. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm not going to do anything terribly exciting, but hopefully it will convey a little bit to pique your interest to look at it more. And the site is svelte.dev, and they've got a great tutorial. Literally, you can learn Svelte in a day, which is pretty cool. So let's first start with a component. Like Stuart was saying, a component allows you to encapsulate all of the core elements of essentially a web app in one file. So in this one, it's very HTML focused. So here I have my code in a script tag, and then I have my style, and that's one thing Svelte treats style as a first-class citizen in the framework. So I have my style that's just for this component, and then I have my markup, and my markup is just for this component. And so it's reactive by the default. So here, if I go in, let me get adjusted to my keyboard. Go in and change something. It's using live reload, so it will change. So that's not necessarily reactive, but that's kind of nice because now I can code and see my browser make changes, and React pioneered that dev experience as well. But let's take something similar to Stuart's example that he showed at the end, and let's go ahead and just declare a variable. Let's call it bar equals 10, and let's say foo equals 5. Okay? And then if I do this little symbol here and say foo bar equals foo times bar, right? And just bear with me with that funny symbol, okay? And let's go ahead and add in our template foo bar, okay? If anyone is good at math, what is that? 50, right?
Right.
Okay, so what do I mean by reactive? Okay, let's add a button. And when we click the button, let's change foo to 10. Okay. So according to Stuart's example, if I change the value of foo to 10, foo bar will still be 50, right? But with Svelte, because it's a compiler, if I click, it should change it to 100. And that's reactivity because it's able to compile this to vanilla JavaScript and essentially make this assignment operator your set state. The assignment operator becomes the way that you change state. And what's really nice about that is if you look at local variables are practically state in your application, right? So what Svelte does is says, hey, let's make local variable state, right? So if you declare a local variable, that's like declaring state in your app. And its sole purpose is to try to get rid of the this keyword. And if you've worked with JavaScript long enough and you still like the this keyword, I would like to meet you and buy you a beer, because it is not fun when you get into complicated issues. And it introduces so many different side effects and so many different challenges. Foot gun doesn't even begin to describe it. More like a body gun, right? It's really challenging. But now, if I wanted to make props for a component, see this export. I use the export keyword, just like in JavaScript, and now I can instantiate this component in a parent component and pass down a value. So what I'm going to do is build just a little front end to a game of life simulator and go through sort of the parts of Svelte, and you'll get a chance to kind of see it in action. So and it won't cover all the parts of Svelte, but it'll cover enough. And you can do this tutorial yourself. It only takes like 20 minutes. So let's give that a whirl. Okay. So the first thing we need is we need a header. So let's go ahead and add a header. And what we'll do is we will import, and I've got some of these files already defined to just save time. So we'll import header from header.svelte in our script tag. And this script tag doesn't have to be at the top. I just keep it at the top because that's what changes the most in my code. And then I do the markup, and then I do the styling. So now we've got our header component, and we just reference it like so. But we want to pass in a title. So let's pass in a title. Game life. Right. Okay, so that should populate our header component, which it does. There's one thing I need to do real quick because the style is not there. There we go. And then we'll open our header component. And now we're passing in a prop, a property on the element. So we need to declare that, export let title. And now this component can see that property, and then I can use it in my markup. Okay. So now we should see that title cascade down. And why did it kill my... I know what's going on. Okay. Let's just go ahead and get rid of the subtitle. And looks like it's overriding my global CSS every time. Let's try it one more time. But for this game, this game of life simulator, we need a grid. So we're going to pull in grid in our app.svelte. So we'll import the grid component. Let's see if it sticks. Nope. All right. Let me change this real quick. Hopefully I'm good on time. My build script, build tools, it's overriding my global CSS, so I'm just going to change it. Now, if I restart. Okay. So we were on the grid component, and grid component, we want to take advantage of the latest and greatest bits. So we want to use some CSS and use a CSS grid. This CSS grid will basically create a background and then put little divs in squares on a matrix. And I'm actually taking advantage of CSS variables here so that I can change the size. Let me make sure. Okay. I don't know if I should have, I think I should have a black box at this point. Yeah, so I didn't bring it in. So let's bring in grid, and hopefully now we got a grid. Okay, so we have a grid with a black background. We need some cells for that grid for our game of life. So let's create some cells. If we go in the code, we've got this game of life library, and basically it just creates an array of an array in the background, and then in each cell there's a 1 or a 0. If it's a 1, they're alive. If it's a 0, they're dead. So we've got all of this code in a nice functional way to do that. And it's exposing a couple of functions. And what we use is a store to connect that functional library to Svelte. And a store is very much like a Redux store. It's just got a subscribe method, and you make changes, and then the subscribe method fires, and it causes Svelte to react to it. So here we've got our store defined with a size of 32, a speed of 100, and then we're exporting the store, which every time the board changes, it's going to call set within that store. So it kind of encapsulates this inside. And then we've got a start, stop, toggle, and generate function that we're going to use for our store. But the first thing we need to do is build the grid. So we'll go into our grid, and instead of saying let size equal 32, we're going to import the store and the size from our store. Then we don't need that anymore, and we still have size, and now we have to, in our markup, sort of iterate through one array, which is all the rows, and another array, which is all the columns. So we'll use a block element called each. And the nice thing about Svelte is that there's only like 4 of these. There's each, there's if, there's await that'll wait for a promise, but there's not a ton of these to learn. It's just a few, which is really, really important. Store is the container of our board. And so the way that we access that container is we use the $, and that essentially tells the compiler to pull and subscribe to those events and then set that to this variable here. So this is our array of arrays, and then we can say as store. So this is like a for each loop, and we're going to actually it's as row, and I'm going to do R and then grab the index, and I'm going to call it row, and then I'm going to do another one each for every R, right? Because that's another array. I'm going to grab the value, whether they're alive or dead, and I'm going to call that index column. And now I can include a div, and I'm going to call it cell. And I'm going to say each. Oops. And each. Okay. So that's a little bit how the templates interact with the code. So I'm going to import a cell component. And if you notice, every time I use a Svelte component, I have to use .svelte. If I'm using JavaScript, I don't have to put an extension. So what that should do, if it works, we should get a group of cells. So we built the board. And we're passing this alive prop. We need to pass that down to our cell component. And we just pass it down by doing alive equals the prop equals the value. And then we can come into our cell component. I better write, okay. And then we can come into our cells component. And we just export, let alive. And then we want to add the alive class to change the background. See how we specify our styles? These are specific to this class. So that .cell class cannot be used anywhere in the app but just this component. And what we want to do is add, if alive is 1, we want to add that as a class name. So we're just going to do class.alive. And since it's truthy, the name of the prop is the same name of the value. So since it's truthy, every time it's truthy, it's going to make the background black. Every time it's not, it's going to make it false or white. And that gives us our grid. Pretty cool? So far, so good? We're going at a good pace? Okay, so the next thing we need to do, I'm going to just throw one button in entrance of time, a start button, but we need to add buttons. And we want to do that in our header. So let's go to our header. And we will import a component called actions from .actions. And I left a great note for me to add actions here. And that should pull in that component and give us some buttons, maybe or maybe not. Let's see. Oh, you know what? Does anyone see what I did wrong? That's right. And another thing, what's nice about React and Svelte is it really gives you good error messages, right? And that's something to really appreciate. If you ever worked with a framework that did not give you, if you worked with JavaScript, it didn't give you good error messages, right? So that's kind of important. For other languages, it's by default, but we have to work for it. So we're going to go into the actions component. And we're going to import the start, the stop. We might as well do all of them. Generate from store. Okay. And what this will do is allow us to add on click events. So with Svelte, you have this on, that's a directive, and there's only a couple of directives. They wanted to keep the API small, on, and then any event that that element has, you can hook to. So we have a click event on a button, so we can hook to that, and then we can just add start. And we can do the same for every single button. And it will generate a event handler, and then that event handler is going to call our functional piece here. So we'll just do stop, and sure, I might as well do generate. It'll take a minute. Okay, so now we have everything wired up. So if I hit start, all my game of life rules should start working. And it will run and run against the rules with the game of life. if there's, if there's more than, everything's about neighbors. So you have neighbors in your cells, and if you have more than 4 neighbors, it's overcrowding and you die. If you have 3 neighbors, it will spawn a new life, and so on and so forth. It's kind of an interesting mathematical game. There's one piece, and this challenge I'm going to leave with you guys, is I'll post this tutorial to Ernest to share with all attendees, but to be able to click a cell and make it alive or dead so that you could sort of stop the game, and then you could come in here and click a cell. And I challenge you guys to figure out, based on what you've learned today, how would you go about doing that? There's a toggle function. All it needs is a row and column. So if you had a row and column and you could capture the onClick event, where would you do that? What component would you do that in? And then how would you do it? So I just showed you all the tools to make that happen. And I challenge you to try to make the click event. And here's what it would look like. Let's see. Well, maybe. Nope. I forgot what I named it.
Maybe not.
No. There it is. Okay. So if I start it and run, it stopped. So now I can go in, and one of the common ones is doing three cells, and then what will happen is when you start it, it will blink. It'll just move side to side until something else affects it. So that's kind of cool. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what Svelte is and how powerful it is. There's a ton of other stuff like context and pretty much all of the good that Stuart talked about, and some more good, I think. But the biggest thing that's important to me is that we've got to get from the point of where every new innovation we do makes our development mental capacity more complex. We've got to hit a point where we start to go down and things start to get more simple. And I think Svelte is a great introduction to that. We've got to innovate in the JavaScript ecosystem to where things get easier to build and not more complex, even though our world is getting more complex. So I think it's possible. I think with this, it demonstrates it, because if you were to code a website in a text editor in 1999, you would practically do this. And it would be bad code because everything would be global, right? So we use a compiler to encapsulate it so it's not global. But this is very intuitive. This is how you learn to code if you learned to code in 1999. It just thinks of HTML, works with the system, and I think it makes a great kind of proof of concept of what life could be like in there. So with that, I don't think I have any more cool slides. So I think we could take questions, but yeah. So that's the last one, right? So that's what I kind of think right there. That's my current state of mind right now. So hopefully that was somewhat valuable and maybe a little bit of a little entertaining. But glad to take questions, Stuart. I was glad to take questions. So.
Yeah, whatever you guys want.
Sorry if we're a little late.
Do I agree with this? Maybe.
Yeah. Yes, Taylor.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Great presentation. When we're doing advanced debugging, so tracing code, trying to trace through what's happening with these compiled languages, how is that working?
Yeah, that's a great question. So console log is super friendly still. Okay. And this little reactive operator, and let me show that real quick. So I did this $, which is a valuable label in JavaScript. That's a reactive operator. So every time a new event happens on this component, I can create a block and I can do console log, whatever in that block, and it's going to repeat. So I've got console log, which solves like, maybe arguably 90% of most issues. And then you've got the debugging tools, developer tools. And the nice thing with Svelte is it compiles into vanilla JavaScript. So when you go into that debugger, you're seeing your code. You're not seeing some obfuscated bit of code. You're actually seeing vanilla JavaScript that you can breakpoint to.
Thanks.
Uh-huh.
For React, you have console log as well. We've currently been working on our team with a new developer who's super hardcore about debugging. And what I've noticed is that my reliance upon React's developer tools, which is just an extension that you can download, extraordinarily valuable. Matter of fact, Chrome works really well with it too, because you can pop a debugger and you just type it into your file, debugger : and then you're able to access through Chrome your debugger. But I would recommend React's developer tools. It's phenomenal.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions?
Would you say that, just as he described React as the V in MVC, do you think Svelte fills a similar need?
Absolutely. Again, there's a lot to unpack, but at a very high level, if you played around with React and you played around with Vue, and if you imagine the best of both of those, Svelte is like the baby of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, by the way, I really dig this stuff too. It's pretty cool.
Questions?
Any other questions?
Wait, so this was kind of a battle, wasn't it? Like a duel?
Yeah, I guess.
A friendly duel.
Yeah.
Who likes React? Dan. Who likes Svelte? All right, cool. Who doesn't like JavaScript? That's a good question. There it is. That's the guy.
And I'd like to give a big shout out to our intern Daniel. He really helped me work through this tutorial. So all of the great stuff from this tutorial is his credit, and all the bad stuff was my mistake. So.
Appreciate Tom. Thanks Stuart. Appreciate you guys doing this, and we're looking forward to Tom and I are working on. Many of you guys don't remember this, but for one year we did the Super Happy Dev Day, which was an all-day, different talks and that kind of thing. And we're thinking about doing one exclusively on serverless architecture in the fall. So I'm working with Tom on that right now. I'm a little distracted. I feel like I've become a real estate developer inadvertently. But hopefully in the next month, basically, my life will return back, and we'll be getting back on this. But thanks to all for coming out, and certainly appreciate it. And we will circle back. I appreciate Dr. Canada coming all the way up from Beaufort. Brian teaches at USC and Beaufort, and appreciate you taking the time to come out this morning. Thanks all. We'll see you guys again.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.